Thank you, Philip, for that very kind introduction. It's a great honour to be speaking here tonight as part of the MSD Directors Series. We were particularly thrilled when Philip asked us to speak about this project and to hold the lecture in the room that's the subject of the lecture. So welcome everybody to the Housemuseum. This is a project within the Lyons oeuvre that's perhaps one of our most experimental and speculative projects, and it contests our ideas about our conventional ideas about public and private, the relationship of living and art, and perhaps most importantly, the age-old question of how art and architecture should relate. So it poses some pretty big questions. It's a project that's been presented in many architectural forums, both here and overseas. And we've presented the fact that it's a small suburban house museum. It has a very unusual program, which is to accommodate a family of 4, and our 2 girls are a good deal more grown up than are shown here, and a very large collection of Australian contemporary art. And a third dimension to the brief was that it be open to the public. So really the fact that we were the residents of the house, the architects, the designers, the collectors, and the people who were prepared to run the museum. It was a kind of unique confluence of opportunities to make this project a reality. And all of that represented in this strange hybrid building, and we've described it as really a sort of new species in terms of typological talk, a new species of building, and we've called it a house museum. But tonight I want to go a little deeper than that, beyond describing the architecture of the building, and this is not meant to put you off, and it's not going to be a 3-hour lecture, but this is simply to show you some of the conceptual and research terrain that informed this project over a 5 or 6 year period. Things from art history through to architectural history, the idea of the collection, its connection to the city, and so on. And this diagram isn't meant to say that these are all connected. These research terrains were in fact quite separate. But out of that emerged this concept of a very unique building. So tonight, over the next 45 minutes, I'm going to take you through 3 or 4 of those only, and then show you the Housemuseum in terms of how that research work was woven into the design of the building. And we'll start just by discussing the idea of collecting, and people have been collecting for millennia, as we all know, and people collect for different reasons. They're motivated by very different things, by an idea to educate themselves, or to decorate their home, or indeed in a public collection to document a part of a time in history. But all of them have in common this idea of a classification schema or a taxonomy. And in our own discipline of architecture, we've had the famous Charles Jenks make this diagram, and you've all seen this, his evolutionary, which is both a genealogy and a taxonomy of architecture. And in the art world, we've had the Alfred Barnes, who we'll meet a few times this evening, who was the director of the Museum of Modern Art in New York. He made this fabulous flow diagram or taxonomy of modern art, and he managed to get neo-impressionism right through to abstract art on a single page, which was a pretty great effort, and even had a box in here for his colleague Philip Johnson, who was working with him at the time. And these taxonomies, this way of thinking about an art collection, particularly a public collection, often translated into the design of the building. So this is actually the museum in Washington, and you can see the building is arranged very much according to period and style. Carl Linnaeus, of course, he created the grandest taxonomy of them all, and that was the way of classifying all living things, and it's a taxonomy that's used to this day. And I'm trying to relate this back to how one thinks about an art collection. And in studying Linnaeus 8 or so years ago, I came across a fellow who was 100 years prior to Linnaeus. He was an English and unknown Englishman who classified plants very differently, and his classification was plants that were useful, plants that were not useful, and plants that were poisonous. And that was in building this collection, which we've done now for 22 years, that was a very interesting taxonomy to think about. So you think about his useful plants that might have had a banana tree and a strawberry and a flower that was used to dye plant materials. So in terms of the Linnaeus way of classifying it was a very mixed bag of things, but connected, that taxonomy connected through an idea about plants. So it's that kind of idea, a taxonomy connected through a sort of conceptual idea that's informed the collection that you're seeing here tonight. And there's about a third of the collection on display in the house at the moment. And the thread that runs through them, these are works that are to do with the metropolis, about the city, about our suburban conditions. This is Howard Arkley, who I was very pleased to know knew Venturi's work. So he had these two books on his desk when we first met. His great fabricated rooms, which you'll see later on up in the dining room upstairs, and this is Arkley actually painting that mural work. Works by Louise Forthen, who many of you will know. This is a new major work of hers, of both of these of Melbourne. Peter Atkins, who looks at found objects in the urban scape and makes these very wonderful abstract paintings from them. And I'm only showing you these to illustrate the kind of work, like the useful plants, that they have. They range in terms of their media, but they have this common thread linking them together. Patricia Piccinini, with her interest in the impacts of new technologies on our contemporary condition. This is a very mythological work that we'll be showing here next year, and the truck babies, which you've all walked past on your way in today. And works that talk about cultural history and memory. And of course a number of architectural works too. So this is a work by Callum Morton, we all know it. This is Habitat, and we'll put that on for you a little later on after our lecture. This is another work, and you all know this building. This was a building that was designed by my father, the gas and fuel buildings. And he always told us that it put us through school. And I stood atop it with my classmates when I was about 7 years old, and it was the newest. It was the sort of the ushering in the era of modernism in Melbourne, and indeed people like Wolfgang Sievers and Mark Strizik, who took this photograph, made it look very, very glamorous in its time. And of course, it came to be the most reviled pair of buildings in Melbourne. So Morton made this work. It's called Gas and Fuel. And as you approach the sculpture, you can hear this disembodied voice inside the sculpture say, "Help me, please help me," as the towers contemplate their impending demolition. And Yaji and I donated the work subsequently to the National Gallery of Victoria. And Donald Bates will be very pleased to hear this, that the work is now sitting back in Federation Square on the very spot where it was demolished. So my father is up there having the last laugh somewhere, I think. So just to finish on this idea of the collection, so these are some of the works, and you'll see some of these tonight, that comprise this collection with this kind of thematic about the contemporary city and about cultural politics, cultural history. But it's very much a collection about now. The second area that was very important in thinking about this building were the parallel histories of private and public museums. And the public museum, as we know it today, is actually a relatively new phenomenon. And the Louvre was the first. It was opened in 1793 by Napoleon. So he was there to showcase all of the looted art that he had acquired, and that genealogy of the public museum found its way from Europe, Berlin, of course, London, across to America, with the Metropolitan Museum, Philadelphia, and right through to museums like Bilbao by Gehry. And in the early days, they were very social places. So these were places where people gathered on the weekends, and there was evidence when the National Gallery in London first opened that the director, or the keeper as he was called, had to stop people from picnicking on the floor in the National Gallery in London, and it was a great meeting place. So we've really come full circle with our public museums back now to this very strong emphasis on recreation. And of course, public museums have ended up being these big sort of institutional behemoths which are there to protect and consolidate public collections. This is the Metropolitan Museum in New York, and it's a fascinating kind of plan to show the different stages of its development with different architects over time. And then along came this fellow. This is Alfred Barnes, who was as I say, the director of the Museum of Modern Art. And he made a number of important contributions to the public museum. And probably the most important was this, and it looks very unassuming here in this drawing, but this is the beginning of the white cube. So Alfred Barnes was the fellow back in 1930 who developed the idea of the white cube. And Brian Doherty, who's really an artist called Patrick Island, I should say, wrote this amazing set of essays on the white cube. And his argument was really that the white cube is anything but neutral, which is how Barnes used to try and describe the white wall, that the white cube has become so strongly associated with particular readings of art that it's now the ubiquitous, as we all know, it's the ubiquitous container in which modern and contemporary art is shown. And it doesn't matter whether we're in Stockholm, which is I think where Guggenheim and I took this photograph. It is now the universal space for showing contemporary and modern art, and it has this timeless quality to it, so it's about erasing all connections with things outside of the space that you're in. Time is suspended. Aaron Betsky, who was here about a year ago, described it as the tomb where all great art goes to die, and it was a pretty interesting kind of description of the white cube. But that idea of the white cube, which is the sort of culmination of that genealogy of the public museum, was a very important moment in the development of this building, as we'll see. So just sort of hold that thought for the moment until we come back to the design of this building. And then a parallel history, in parallel with the public museum, and this is a history that predates the public museum, were these private collections and private museums, starting with the Wunderkammer. And these were private collections, and they were trying to be a kind of universal representation of the world. It was an aesthetically displayed collection, and those started many centuries ago. In more recent times, though, these were some of the precedents that informed this project, and many of you will have visited these. This is Mrs. Goetz's little museum in her back garden in Munich, the Wallace Museum in London, Peggy Guggenheim's museum, and John Soane's fabulous museum in London. And this is one that we all visited when we were students, John Soane's museum, and he progressively purchased terrace houses in Lincoln's Inn Fields to create this effectively a private museum. And it's this wonderful combination of labyrinthian small rooms, beautifully articulated, and vertical spaces with this incredibly ingenious lighting system on the roof. In fact, that's one of the really special views of the John Soane Museum, is to go up onto the roof and see these incredible lights that he created. And this is that daylit central space with his collection of architectural artefacts, with a bust of Soane himself in the centre of the scheme. Alfred Barnes, who made his private collection, sadly now being moved from Lancaster County to Philadelphia against the wishes of his will and the board of directors. But a very beautiful, very important private collection. And this is the Wallace collection in London. which is a domestic collection, but it's a bit like the Frick. The domestic setting is rather large in its scale, but again, that's largely untouched from when the family left the collection to the state. And closer to home, we have, of course, the Heide Museum by McGlashan and Everest. And this brief was a museum to be lived in, so it's a little different to what we've done here, which, as you'll see in a moment, is a more hybridised kind of idea. But nice to have that sort of local example to draw upon here. But this is the one that was the greatest influence on the Housemuseum project. This is the P.E. Guggenheim Museum in Venice. This is a photograph taken when P.E. Guggenheim moved into it in 1952, and she was there until she died in 1979. And she opened her palazzo 3 afternoons a week for 3 hours for 27 years, from that date until the day she died. So it was a really wonderful thing that she did. And this is a photograph of her actually standing next to the same painting the year before she died at the age of 80-something. And when the tours got too much, we've heard from the Guggenheim Museum, she used to retreat up to the rooftop to escape the crowds, often not wearing anything. So this is and I made my first visit to it in 1980, which was a year after she died, so it was really when it had first opened. This is a photograph taken at that date, and it was the most amazing experience to see these Pollocks and Picasso paintings, which Guggenheim had collected. So you made the connection between Guggenheim, the collector, her work, her life. She married a number of the artists that she collected, and to see all of that in this residential scale building was a tremendous experience, and it was an incredible counterpoint to the kind of public museum experience that people had. So, so it was a combination of those things that made it a very indelible impression. So I'll talk a little bit now about this idea of a hybrid, and it's something that we at Lyons have been very interested in over many years, and we're talking there sort of typological hybrids, programmatic hybrids, and so on. And this is a medical centre we did, which is on Bell Street in Preston. So it's a kind of hybrid of a Main Street showroom and a small hospital. It's a community health centre. This is the Monash Student Services Building, which is a kind of idea of a public temple, hybridised with an information centre for students. Callum Morton's rather kind of amusing take on the Mies van der Rohe Farnsworth House. This is a 7-Eleven, and here we've got Patricia Piccinini's Truck Babies, which is sort of contemplating the idea of a kind of biomorphic, what does a truck human hybrid look like. So these were some very early diagrams we did for the Housemuseum, looking at what it meant to disturb our conventional conceptions and expectations of public and private. What would it be like to have people running through a public museum, or indeed what would it be like to have a home-like structure sitting inside a museum? We looked at it programmatically too, so we took the domestic program and the public museum program and listed out all of the activities and expectations and behaviours of both types, and then connected sort of lines through them to establish elements between the two buildings that could be double functioning, and you'll see we have a lot of those in the house here, and those where there was an opportunity to really accentuate one or the other by bringing those elements into focus. So that was quite a lengthy research process. And these were some of the, Van Eyck would have called them twin phenomenon, and Venturi would have called them double functioning elements. But these are some of the programmatic elements where you walked in this evening into the entry hall, also acting as the museum foyer, and so on. So you can see that many of the spaces have these dual public and private functions. Architecturally, we thought of the process of hybridising in a number of potential ways, and the first was a bit like the lemon and lime tree attached to a single trunk, that one would graft a private museum onto a public museum. So the public museum might be out the back of the property. Or alternatively, a vertical stack where the public museum is there for public entry with the house as a more private apartment, if you like, on top of the building. But we thought the more interesting and challenging opportunity out of that research into the behaviours of public and private was to infuse one into the other. So this is a sort of sectional diagram illustrating the idea of that idea of infusing and juxtaposing the public and the private. Formally, we looked at those options in greater depth. This was an example of the grafting. So this was an initial idea of the house with this large extension at the back. This would have been the public museum. But as I say, at the end of the day, the idea of the combined program within a single envelope was a stronger idea. So these are some of the form studies that we looked at to wrap that mixed program together into a single object. And of course we wrapped it in a very un-Lyons material, a dark zinc material. And that material inflects to accommodate this rather lumpy program that we've developed in the building. And if you're here in the daylight and walking around, you'll see how it inflects to accommodate its context. This was the next development in that infusion diagram, and we enhanced it slightly further by articulating. And the interesting thing was the plan and section idea was kind of they were synonymous, and some distinctly public spaces. And you've seen the white room as you've walked in. This is the black box behind me here. Some explicitly private spaces. These are the bedrooms and so on. And then flowing between these spaces which are both public and private. They have attributes of both. And what was interesting about the diagram, particularly sectionally, were these interfaces between private and public and into these in-between spaces. There was this sense of looking through these very strong thresholds and the idea of a kind of voyeuristic idea to the interior design concept for the building. And it reminded me of this. We all know the famous Hitchcock film. So the idea of the voyeur. And here we are, we're in Jimmy Stewart's bedroom looking across a public space into another private space. So that's sort of that layered idea of the detached voyeur. And Dan Graham, who we studied also a good deal, an American artist, his work over 30, 40 years was about bringing the viewer into the space of the gallery, so the viewer becoming the viewed. So it was a kind of voyeuristic idea, but also one that talked about the white cube and the relationship that we have as people viewing art. So the next thing we looked at was this idea, and you'll really experience this as you walk through the building tonight, is this idea of a scenographic landscape, an architectural landscape for displaying the work. And it builds on the idea of the voyeuristic looking through, up and down. And it began with what you'd expect it to begin with, which is the Renaissance idea of fixed perspective, and the fact that with that comes this idea of a sort of strong idea of horizon, and it's part of our physiology, that the way we walk and the way we experience the world, we have this kind of preponderance to look at the world along the horizon. And this is a great work that we bought last year, which is in the White Room by Sean Gladwell, which talks to that idea very, very strongly. And it's been used in many installations since. And again, like the white cube, there's an almost universal height at which paintings are hung on a white wall, and it's between 1500 and 1550. And that's the sort of average eye height of a normal person, except for this fellow who happens to be looking up at this Picasso. So not illustrating it very well. So here's our friend Bar back again, and this was the second thing that he was very, very strong about developing, was this idea of people looking one-on-one at an artwork. So it was shielding out every other possible distraction. So it was about the autonomy of the viewer and the autonomy of the artwork. And I've tried to illustrate it here. So sort of bracketing both, and there's a connecting line in terms of the perception of the work between the artwork and viewer. But in addition to looking horizontally, we also look up. So we look up at a call to sculpture, and we look up in some of the older museums where they've skied the paintings up against the wall. So there's a history there, a precedent there of looking up and down, and here are some examples of in religious art where, for obvious reasons, we're encouraged to look up and to look down. And this is a great shot of the Mies van der Rohe's museum in Berlin, and this is actually the art exhibition. This is a work which was laid on the floor when we were there a couple of years ago. And Jeff Lambie's floor work. This is interesting too, because the fellow, the observer here, is actually looking up. So he's doing exactly what I'm trying to illustrate. And I found this, as part of this research, found this diagram which was made by Herbert Bayer. He was a colleague of Walter Gropius at the Bauhaus. And it was a diagram that informed a number of exhibitions that Bayer made, and it was called his field of vision diagram. And it was about breaking, and this actually predated Alfred Barnes' one-on-one idea of viewer and work. So this was about involving a horizon, looking up and below into an involved viewer. And a contemporary of his, actually a little earlier, this was in sort of 1924, 25, this fellow Frederick Kiesler. And he was a theatre designer, and I'm sure Peter Corrigan would know him, of his work well. And he made this exhibition in 1924 in Vienna as part of the exhibition of New Theatre Technique, was the name of the exhibition. And these T-shaped and L-shaped elements he used to display these works of art. And this was one of the most revolutionary exhibitions where the artwork was brought out into the space of the viewer. So you became part of it. And he later went on to make this gallery for Peggy Guggenheim, which sadly has been demolished. This was in New York, the Surrealist Gallery. This is actually Kiesler sleeping on one of his pieces of furniture here. He's obviously had a hard day working with Peggy Guggenheim. And this is an example of that space where the viewer is very much part of the reading of the art. So unlike the bar example where the brackets go this way, this is about bringing viewer and artwork together. How we move through museums is also a very interesting thing to observe, and in many museums, we've all been through them in Europe. You kind of work your way through the enfilade in this kind of fashion, but it's very much a prescribed way of moving through the museum. And in Wright's case, in the Guggenheim, a very prescribed way of moving through the building and observing the art. So we then thought about extending the idea of the fixed perspective with the Bayer idea of a broader compass of the view with the idea of movement. And these were two drawings that were an inspiration for that next step in terms of developing this idea of scenography. Duchamp's Nude Descending a Staircase, and this was a drawing that Ed Bacon used in his lectures at Philadelphia back in the 80s by Paul Klee to talk about simultaneous movement systems. And we looked at the Parisian flaneur, and this is in a sort of Baudelairian, Walter Benjamin sense. These were people in Paris, principally men, who would perambulate through the city streets, observing, with a critical eye, observing the unfolding city as they move through it. So that's the kind of idea it conveys about a perspectival view of the city, layered, combined with movement. And last week I found this terrific image, and this is, remember that slide of Mr. Bayer's diagram? This is in Korea, and they actually put Bayer's people to work as flaneurs in Korea. Aldo van Eyck, who taught us at Philadelphia, made this little project, the Sonsbeek Pavilion, which is a little sculpture pavilion. It was destroyed. It's been recently rebuilt. And he talked about a phenomenological architecture, and it was a kind of similar idea of people moving through the spaces of this sculpture exhibition in a way that revealed vistas and revealed the artwork as you move through these walls of the building. And this is a view of the reconstructed pavilion at the Krollermüller Park in the Netherlands. So the Housemuseum here informed very much by a move from the bar view of the world, which is people being one-on-one with the viewer with this very kind of prescriptive way of moving through the building, to one where you're able to look at multiple relations between the works, and where the viewer is involved, and that's part of your experience in viewing the work. And here is a map of a typical walk through the Housemuseum. So this is the kind of flaneur diagram, if you like, for the ground floor of this building. About a year ago, we commissioned an Australian artist, Matthew Sleeth, to make a video work for our practice, and we were very delighted when he took 3 of our buildings, the John Curtin School in Canberra, the Housemuseum, and the BHP Billiton Headquarters building, and he made this video. And we're going to show it to you tonight. It'll be in the black room after our talk this evening. And the video involves his 2-year-old daughter, dressed in this spacesuit, walking through each of our buildings. And this to me was very exciting because it talked directly to the idea of this scenographic landscape of how we experience both the spaces of the building and experience the art. And finally she disappears into the black room in her little spacesuit. I think it's a really nice, nice image, that one. And just to give you one example of that in the Housemuseum here, this is a photograph one of our daughters took at the National Gallery in London. This is Bocchini's Assumption of the Virgin at the top of the stairs. So the idea of the scenographic kind of installation, it's about effort, it's about revealing things, and the idea of climbing a stair to see a major work like this. And that has a kind of parallel here with the large Arkley work upstairs, and this is a sequence from the front door up this, for a domestic building, a monumental set of steps where this building is revealed, and finally you're in the space of this mural work. And just before we look at the building, just to very quickly look at ideas of art and placement. We see a lot of art online now, and it means very little to us because we've got no idea how large this work is or what its context or the artist's idea is in terms of its context for it to be viewed. So, and even a move from the artist's studio, from the floor of the studio, onto a wall, in this case a white wall, this is at the front of the Housemuseum here, immediately gives it some intention in terms of the space that it creates for the viewer, both obliquely and as a frontal view. Frames are wonderful devices too because they provide a physical delimitation to the image, and these particularly robust frames allow paintings to be hung very close together without interfering with one another. So they have their own architectural space, their own window, so to speak. And these are the sorts of installations that we used to see back in the 18th and 19th centuries, where you had to crane your neck to see these guide paintings. But they were able to do it because of the authority of the, of the picture frame. These were interesting to us in terms of breaking down the kind of spatial dimensions of the white cube. Here in this case the idea of the wall by having works. This is the Prown Room by Liszewski, who was a contemporary of Kiesler. This is a recreation of it, but here using the work to work with the space of the room and to break that rectilinear quality of the cube. And of course, the most perverse and subversive of them all, Duchamp, who filled galleries with string. You've all seen that famous installation that he did, tying it up with string, and this one with the coal bags on the roof. So he too was sort of saying that this is a dimension of the art display experience that's been ignored, and he was calling for it to be reviewed. And this is Andy Warhol in Castelli's studio in New York with his silver balloon. So again, using the dimension of the space, an idea of kind of the volume of the space as distinct from the walls. And this is our youngest daughter and me photographing Kusama's Infinity Room at Louisiana. So this is the kind of the extrapolation of that into a truly immersive art environment, an infinite art environment. And we have that to some extent in the Black Room. This is a video work in the Black Room behind us. And Rosenquist's F111 painting, which was an inspiration to Arkley in making fabricated rooms. So he wanted this to be a painting that was an immersive experience as you entered the space, but was also a work like F111 where you were up close to the work, you were able to read particular passages in the work. And that's how it's been installed in the Housemuseum. And the idea of scale was very important too. So this was a drawing I made of looking at a Pollock in the Peggy Guggenheim Museum as distinct from looking at, in contrast to looking at a painting in the Louvre. So the kind of relationship of viewer to the artwork, to the scale of the space, is a very interesting kind of relationship. This is Blue Poles, where it was first displayed. It was owned by Ben Heller in New York. This is before he sold it to the National Gallery here in Canberra. And he and Pollock worked together to actually lower the ceiling of his apartment to make this right size for Pollock's painting. So Pollock made them on the floor, as we know, in a small barn, and Pollock was very much about the scale of the space being right, and over many years it was displayed in a very inappropriate way. This is actually the Tate Gallery in London, where it looks like a sort of postage stamp on the wall, very much not how Pollock had intended it to be. These are some works by Anthony Gormley. You might have seen some of these recently. And this is how the invitation came to us. So we expected them to be sort of life-size sculptures, as his works tends to be. And walking into the gallery, this is what they look like. And they're 300 millimetres high. And it was an extraordinary experience. So it completely recalibrated that scale experience between the gallery. And this is another of Gormley's work up in Sydney. This is a reclining figure. This is the head and the body in this enormous warehouse gallery space. So doing the reverse. And Rothko always said that he painted big in order to be intimate. So that's a very interesting thing that he did. So he was also very concerned about the space being intimate for his very large paintings. And as architects, we have other devices that we can use to frame artworks. This is the famous Nike on the Daru stair in the Louvre, and it's on a pedestal. But really, the way this is the pedestal for that work, and it's framed in this incredibly powerful way. Again, it's sort of scenographic experience. As you move up that stairway, that work reveals itself to you. And this is the reverse, and this is a photograph we took at Louisiana again, sort of a couple of years ago. And to my mind, this is one of the most beautiful framings. It's kind of a reverse framing of the Daru stair in the Louvre of this work by Henry Moore, framed by the sky and the trees. And pedestals have been a device too that have been around for centuries, and these are devices that are also used like skying paintings to give particular significance and intent to works. This is the fourth plinth in the Trafalgar Square, a very large plinth indeed, and you'll see some of those in the building here today. And then finally, before we get onto the architecture of this building, just to talk a little bit about the surface of the wall. And again, predating the white cube, there were decorative wallpapers, and this was Kahn's work at his famous gallery in New Haven, and Brigance, which we all know by Zumthor, with these concrete walls, and they have a special mixture of concrete in their basement that they have a formula to allow that wall to be patched. So bringing some of those threads together, these were some of the ideas for the Housemuseum, and so there are two explicitly public spaces, the white cube and the black cube, and they act as the anchors of the two buildings. You can see a sectional diagram here with the idea of this sort of voyeuristic viewing into the white space, and then the public and private spaces flowing between those two anchor points. And here it is a little more clearly illustrated in the three-dimensional drawing. And as you walked in tonight, you saw the white cube, and this is a 2-storey high space. It's a very large object which feels very out of place in a domestic setting. So that sort of idea of, like Gormley, upsetting the scale balance is part of heightening the experience of the building. And I did something very heretical to the white cube, and I cut these slots into the top of it. And this was to develop this idea of the kind of being able to see through, the sort of voyeuristic idea, public to private to private. But this is something that you don't do in a white cube space, and the many museum directors we've had here from overseas can't understand why we've done that. But as you walk through the building, you'll see why it makes sense. Then in the plan, we developed these idea of boxes. This was an idea about the public-private. These boxes, a bit like Kahn's servant spaces, served and servant spaces. So these boxes accommodate the coat cupboard, the kitchen, the toilet, the bedrooms, and they're all made out of timber. And the terrific benefit of that is that in putting all of the functional house functions inside the box, that you have this terrific surface area on the outside of each box on which to hang art. And some of the boxes are very heavily engineered. This is a sketch for the one in the front of the house, which you'll see a little later on, as the one you've seen already in the front foyer space. So the idea of boxes is a way of articulating a language for the building. We thought a lot about the surface of the wall, going back to those precedents of wallpapers and stone finishes and so on. And this was an idea of outside of the white cube, articulating a surface for the panelling in the building. And we decided that we would spell out the word art in capital letters across the roof of the house, and these are 22-metre high letters. And rather than paint the letters on the timber panels, that we would make up those letters out of very fine text, and you can see some of them on the pipe organ here. And we experimented as part of our work in the studio to look at different fonts and spacings to provide that right level of grain for the walls. And they were digitally printed, so this is a very large digital printer, and the texts were printed onto the timber veneer, so they were tattooed into the timber surface. And this is what they look like up close, and some of you have already tried to read some of the texts, which are words that the family have put together. So it's that idea of kind of public-private. The public gesture is the big scale text, and then up close is the private gesture, which is these words that 35,000 words that the family have put together, including names of our girls' best friends who are no longer their best friends. And looking at the house in the sort of wider context in terms of the street, there used to be a very substantial cypress hedge around the property here before we purchased the property, but it was sadly burned or torched by the hedge burner. But we thought it was an interesting idea to recreate that in some way. And we saw this one in the Western District with the name of the property embossed into the into the hedge. So we came up with the idea of using the brick fence in some way to replicate the idea of the textured hedge, but to again make a public gesture with this front fence. And in the era of Google Earth, and this was sort of designed when Google Earth was just beginning, this was an idea about making a connection, a kind of global connection with what's a relatively small museum in a kind of global context by writing the initials of the museum on the roof and on the property. And you'll see in the front garden, you can see them out the window there. Even tonight, you can see the white concrete spelling out the letters of the museum. And that was an idea sort of akin to the sheep station roof. So just to quickly take you through the building. So this is the view from Cotham Road, and you can see here that the Housemuseum has a front fence like everybody else. In fact, the brick colour is called Cotham. That's very coincidental. And we've used this embossed, or this corbelling in the brickwork to spell out the word Cotham on the front, and you can just very faintly see the word Florence there on the side view of the house. But the form there of the building with its zinc wrapping, talking about sort of really house and an idea of an institutional building. And in the back laneway, which people rarely go to, there's a smiley face. You can see it there on the side, which was put there for our two children. And in the front garden, so this is the capital letter L, which is being spelled out in white concrete. And again, this idea of the large-scale public gesture in terms of this scale of this surface of white, combined with the domestic scale of the chairs and the trees and the landscaping in the front garden. And some very curious sculptures and plants also reinforcing that idea. When you come into the house, you're immediately put in touch with the art. So there's no ante-space, no hall space as you'd have in a public museum. Into the door, and you're immediately confronted with a major work of art. And then there's cross-access, which takes you through to the front garden to this sculptural work by Christopher Langdon. And the expectation of walking up the entry stairs up to the dining room above. And as you look up, as you enter, you see this is part of the capital R of the word art, made up of these fine texts. And this is a view which really describes the idea of the white cube having almost sort of landed into the centre of this domestic partie. And here we are in the white cube space. This is the previous exhibition of Patricia Piccinini's. You can see these slot windows cut into the top of the space. We've got works actually hanging on the top of the space. So this was like the Warhol idea of the balloons, about really thinking about the exhibition space as a total volume. In the living room, an axial view to a work by Louise Fortham. This is the work of the Eiffel Tower, one of her early works. And in the spirit of John Soane, a cabinet which opens up to reveal a series of studies by Peter Atkins for a series of paintings that are on show in the White Room. But these little windows and connections, as you move about the building, connecting you with the outside. Here's an example of a double functioning element. This is my study, but also the museum archive, where all of the correspondence for the artists that are in the collection is being held over this 22-year period, and we have researchers and art students come in to access that quite regularly. And this is the sort of Rothko Chapel of the Housemuseum. These are works by Howard Arkley that went to Venice. His series of doors, fly-wire doors, and each of these works is the size of a door. And he was very concerned. This is before he died. We talked about this, that the space that they were shown in should be right size for the work. So very, much like Rothko's view of scale with the work. This is a Callum Morton work along the side boundary of the house, and you can see here this idea as you move past the work, you see it obliquely to begin with, you look through it and you see your reflection in the work as you walk past. So a very kind of engaging and interactive artwork. This is the long axis down the house. It's 72 metres long, and there are a series of niches in the side wall, this one accommodating Moja Safdie's habitat, as reinterpreted by Callum Morton. And this is the kitchen through here, and as you stand in the kitchen and look through this doorway, you get this, again, this sort of very scenographic view of a fragment of the city framed by the toaster and the microwave. So you get this sort of domestic city combination. This is the kitchen, which is again in one of the larger boxes with a slot cut into it for its servery. And all of the boxes have these, and a few of you have asked already this evening, have these ferrules drilled into them, into which we screw a puck fitting. And these were found at a wholesale store that supplies department stores, and they hang bags and shoes and things on the walls in department stores. So this was a system, and it's been infilled at 600mm centres throughout the house. There are about 4,000 of them, and it allows us to hang work in a very flexible way through the building. And I got home one night after they'd all been installed, wanting to put the first painting up, and I got home and our then 7-year-old daughter had hung her interpretation of Monet's Water Lily Bridge on the wall. And the marvellous things about boxes is that they have corners, so it's not so much the faces that I find interesting, but it's the corner condition of these timber boxes, where you might have paintings to paintings, or in this case photographs to a wall of bags, and various other things that support the domestic kitchen. Or upstairs, a series of skyed drawings and paintings, and a wall of books. And downstairs we cohabit with the works. This is the idea of infusing the two. So while we're sitting there on the green couch watching television, the truck babies are also watching their television. And you'll see that a little later on. They have an instructional video on how to drive on the streets in Tokyo. And in that living room space we have another fold-out cupboard, and this is a small museum, Alain Duchamp's Valise Museum, that our girls curate, and these are things that they've collected on their school trips and trips with us over the years. So again, that central space where you were before is another one of these double functioning spaces. It's a living space and also a space like tonight where it's used for museum functions. Into the music room, we have this work by Brooke Andrew on the right-hand wall here, and the pipe organ on this side. And this space, like tonight, is also used for us to play music as a family, but also used for architecture and artist talks and other events. I can tell you a little bit about the organ later on if you like, but it's a hybrid organ, so it's very much in the spirit of the building. It's got real pipes and digital pipes working together. And the black room space behind us here, currently showing a Patricia Piccinini work and other video works. And our girls have parties in there. This is so again that connection between a video art space and a domestic space for use by the extended family. And then moving up the stairs to the upper parts of the building, even the stairs have slots cut into them, so as you're going up the stairs you get views framed of artworks on the wall. And arriving at the dining room space, the Howard Arkley space, and obviously the furniture is connecting to that too, so this was an idea of the furniture and the work talking together, and the furniture was kept very neutral. And on the upper level of the building, this is where the experience of being able to see through and down and beyond really comes into focus. So this was the sort of voyeur, Bayeux diagram, really finding its expression in this central room of the building. And it's particularly interesting when it's full of people. And as people do tours with Yaji during the week, it's very interesting to watch people's behaviours as they walk from the front door through the white room. Everybody suddenly becomes very quiet. And they move out into the kitchen space and everybody becomes lively again. So people even subconsciously are understanding that these thresholds between what they perceive as public and private are very strong. And you can look through into our bedroom apartment, so there's that kind of voyeur idea in play from the upper part of the building, and people looking down on you from the upper spaces of the building. And just to take you back to that rear window view, that Hitchcock view. So this is a view standing in our private library. We have a very small scale, again, a sort of Duchampian small scale museum vitrine here, looking from a private space across the white cube, across to the private dining room. So there's that kind of layered idea, and particularly when people are working there or eating there, there's that layered idea of seeing through this sort of scenographically constructed space. Upstairs, the spaces are smaller, so these are the outsides of the boxes. This is the girls' bedroom box and the stair box, and you can feel that sense of compression. And some longer, narrower corridor spaces. And for those of you who are interested, this is a Robert Venturi original drawing upstairs, and it's framed in a particular way. You see it as you come up the stair, and the windows were put at the lower level here to bring light into that space, but not to disturb the idea of the display. And in the library, the girls have a doll's house, which they purchased when they were very young, and this is an art doll's house, and it comes complete with Elizabeth Kruger paintings and Brancusi sculptures. So that's kind of rolling itself back into the idea. And all of the boxes, the private boxes, have these doors, and when they're closed, they are very private, and they contain the living spaces for the family. One green and one orange in the case of our girls. And when the doors open, you get this kind of interesting threshold here between the sort of private family activity and the public museum, including the pink slippers. Then I'll just finish. I've got just another five minutes or so, because I thought as architects you'd be interested to see the making of the building. It was an incredibly collaborative process. We had a tremendous builder who had a team of specialists to make the building. This is the white cube under construction, and the council had letters asking why there was a squash court complex being developed in Cotham Road and a steel superstructure. And when it got to this point, one of the neighbours, it was really too much for them, and they, when we came back one weekend, we had this sign on the side fence and on the front fence, which we've kept in the museum archive. And we rather like this view of the building too. This is just before it had its zinc cladding put onto it, and we almost stopped at this point because we thought this was a very sort of beautiful sculptural object framed in ply. These are all of the pre-printed timber panels arriving on site, so all of them CAD cut with their ferrules, all of the lighting all pre-cut before they arrived on site, and they went together like a jigsaw puzzle. And this is the fellow who did most of the installation of the panels, and even the texts read seamlessly across the joints. Then we worked with the artists and made drawings with them in terms of how these works might be placed within this kind of scenographic landscape that we'd constructed. And this was an 8 to 10 month process to install the first set of works in the building. This is the Arkley work being installed upstairs. Our daughters were given the opportunity to paint their own rooms, and this is Carlin's colour samples for her orange room. And I said this looked like a Rothko, and she said, "Who's Rothko?" And so I showed her this and said, "That's what a Rothko looks like." And all of the furniture in the house was designed. The chairs that you're sitting on, the organ and so on, were all made locally here. And this again, the sort of spirit of Kiesler and his Corellian furniture that he made for the Peggy Guggenheim Museum in New York. And this hexagonal desk, which is in my study, and it's a great shape because it means that nobody can sit directly opposite you. People are always inflected one way or another from you. This is the organ, the pipe organ, and for those of you sitting under it, you can see it's a very sturdy structure. And this was made in Italy, Sydney, Melbourne, to our design, and was assembled here. And this is how the pipes arrived from Ferntree Gully, and here they are installing them with their newspaper wrappings still around them. And this mural work that you can see on the wall here, so this is an example of a wall that's intrinsic to the kind of fabric of the architecture, was made by Brooke Andrew, and he had a team of about 5 people here for a week making this work. This is Brooke at work on that wall. And they taped the design across the wall, and after they'd completed the taping of it, they painted the whole wall black. And they left it like that for about a week. Then they came back and they peeled the tape off very slowly to reveal this extraordinary pattern, which is the Wurundjeri motif of Brooke Andrews' family here in Melbourne. And juxtaposed over that is this neon text which says in Lithuanian, "So you've always wanted to be black, white friend." And this is a work that was first shown in Lithuania, which is this one here. And that spirit's continuing today. This is another work that we've commissioned with Brooke Andrew, and he's designing this specifically to relate to the scenographic opportunities of that white cube space. And these are images that he's going to support a bit like theatre flats and position in the space for these privileged views. And these are some photographs he took for us of the model that he's making of that at the moment. And this is a work that's talking to the atomic tests in Western Australia, and that will be shown here probably sometime next year. So this is the view from the slot windows at the top of the white cube space. And then finally, just to show you what it's like to live in the building, and people ask us what it's like when the crowds go. Is it like the movie The Night of the Museum, and all of the artwork comes alive and the sculptures start walking around the house? But it's a very easy house to live in. It's full of natural light, and our youngest daughter still uses her scooter to move around the building on the concrete floors. And as you can see, there are spaces that allow us to live in it as a family. Although on occasions that idea of being on show, that kind of voyeuristic idea, does become a challenge. And Callum Morton described this as much as a museological or architectural experiment. It was a sociological experiment too, the idea of this house. And our vegetable garden out the back, architect designed, of course. And us cohabiting in the living room with the truck babies and doing our laundry and our washing, overseen by this incredible contemporary robot. Callum Morton opened the building to the public, and some of you actually were present at that day. We invited all of the artists to that opening day, and this was the first time that they'd seen their work in the context of other works that they'd done over that period of time. And the website was launched, and over the last 3 years we've had nearly 10,000 people from all around the world come to visit the Housemuseum. And these are people who come to look at the architecture, or come to look at the art, or come to have this very extraordinary experience of this space, architecture and art woven together. And a couple of years ago we had the board of the Guggenheim come for afternoon tea. They spent an afternoon with us. This is the director of the Peggy Guggenheim Museum, Philip Rylands, and he was very interested indeed to understand the the importance that the P. Guggenheim Museum had from that visit all those years ago had on the design of this particular building. And we've had architecture talks like we're having tonight. Here's the famous Peter McIntyre talking about his house right here, and Peter presented it as if he'd designed it just yesterday. So I'll conclude there, and I hope that that's been a sort of an interesting non-architectural description of a building that you're about to experience. So this is a building that we think is opening up some small but interesting new territory in museology in terms of our thinking about public and private, and this big question about how art and architecture work together. So thank you.
I have a few questions.
Sure, yeah.
As is normal with the MSD Director Series, we now can open up to the floor for some questions. So, do people have some questions for Corbett? There must be something. Yeah, Kirsten.
What's that?
Where's the family?
Oh, they're doing their homework with their box door shut. But we'll ask them to open it for you in a minute, so you can.
Corbett, I was going to ask, some of the images showed works of art in other places. Do you get to move them around, or how do you know when to move, or is it that you're constantly acquiring?
We're constantly acquiring. We're certainly constantly acquiring, but we're acquiring, and more interestingly, artists are making work now for the spaces in the building. So that's a very exciting thing to happen. So yes, periodically we'll move a work from here to there because we have a sort of sense that it'll work better in that space in terms of how you come upon it, how you're able to view it in the round, like this work here, which is moved this week.
And another question related to that. In some of the design drawings you showed, there seemed to be an implication that certain walls were going to have certain works of art hung on them. Have some of those moved? So a niche or a wall was meant to be a permanent home for a work of art originally, but then it has changed. Has that happened, and has it been an issue?
No, there are two permanent works, and one is the Callum Morton habitat, which you'll see in a moment, in this niche, and that's a purpose-designed niche for that. And the other is the Howard Arkley fabricated rooms, and that was designed to within 2 or 3 millimetres to accommodate that work precisely. But other than that, the spaces in the building are and they're designed large and small, flexible, long views, short views, intimate spaces to accommodate a wide range of work, and that's part of so it's a working kind of project in terms of how it's curated.
Yes, Don.
Yeah, when you just said a minute ago that it was very exciting having works created specifically for the space. Could you talk a bit more about that? I mean, what's exciting about that? Is it because of its specificity, or, I mean, I'm interested to understand if a work is created for a space, does it also have limitations because it's seen in the context of that space, as opposed to some of the work you bought originally, which would have been in a gallery, and then you bring it home and now have it in a different space? I'm just interested in that relationship. Yeah,
no, that's a very good observation. So there are artworks that are portable, and the old idea of the easel painting was exactly that it was able to be hung and displayed in a wide range of settings. The Arkley work upstairs is kind of a step beyond that, and it's been shown at the Potter and in many museum contexts around Australia for its benefit and otherwise. And the kind of work that we talked about earlier about commission work is very specific to this space. So you're right, particularly that work of Andrew's, which wouldn't work in a generic white cube space because it relies on the entry points into the room, and it relies on those vistas and viewpoints from the upper part of the gallery. So I meant exciting in the sense that in terms of the group who've conceived this kind of laboratory, if you like, it's really interesting to see how artists are able to respond to that. And that large black fur work that you saw early on, that will be shown in there on its own So we'll take everything else out. We'll close the big door, and it will be in a in a very pure white space. So there's that kind of continuum, if you like, between specific works and non-specific works.
What's your equivalent of Peggy escaping to her terrace and reclining?
A box up there that's got a very big wooden door in it that closes. Yeah. So, but
not acceptable.
A real laneway.
You would just say only a third of the collection is on public view, and issues domestically and with museums is always storage. So where is the 2/3 of the collection kept?
Look, they're stored off-site in a location that I can't tell you about, and they're brought in as required. So yeah, not here.
There's been a lot of drawings and diagrams that you devised to how you can balance out home and museum. I suppose in terms of the practicality of then explaining that to council and neighbours, it seems like that would have been sort of that's another lecture altogether about sort of the intricacies of trying to explain something that's quite unique and having people sort of accept that and understand that, but without being sort of blind sign over the property of people.
Yes, well, it became an issue, and it became a major issue. And you may have followed in the papers last year that there was a very major planning question raised about this building because it was so unique. The planners had no category in which to place it. And our view was that it was a home that had a private collection that we were opening to the public, a bit like a National Trust property on odd occasions. But it was the frequency of use and so on that others in the community read it as a public museum. So we had to go through a very detailed planning process to work through those issues with a whole range of experts, and that was determined very recently that this is a domestic building principally, with that ancillary use as a museum. So yeah, it's a way of that kind of that conundrum of the type, that hybrid type, finding its way into the public psyche. And that sign was, as you say, and that was done at the early stage of the construction too. So people really thought this was a gymnasium or an industrial building just by virtue of the structure of the building.
John?
When you brought this project into a busy architectural practice, did you have to shift your way of doing the practice as you sort of, in your role as design contributor to collaborating with a client? Did you have to sort of shift ownership a bit of this project and behave differently to the normal manners within the office?
Yes, and as you know, John, architects are the worst owned clients, and that's why it took 6 years to design, because you're always waiting for that next next idea. But a lot of the research was done privately here, away from the office. But certainly the collaboration, it was very intense collaboration about the making of the building and the design of the final building. But it was at a scale we'd never worked at before. So our Lyons work has been principally in the kind of public sphere and in the institutional sector. So to do a building of this fine grain was something that was very new to us, but not to you, obviously.
Corbett, I might ask the last question. You've done this with your agent at the back there, and you've built and designed it together. Do you also collect together when you actually purchase or commission a work? How do you do that?
Just like that. So I started 22 years ago, before we were married, and had some very good advice. And then when we were married, which we've been married now for 17, 18 years, we've been collecting together. And now our children, who've grown up with Howard Arkley and Patricia Piccinini, they're 17 and 15. They have a view on the world too, which is we find very, very interesting too. So they're part of the process too.
Philip, Corbett, is there any chance of a piece on the organ?
After I've had a drink, I'll play. Yes, Peter. Yes, we'll play you something on the organ. It was playing up a little earlier, but
I just have one brief question. All the work is Australian contemporary art, Corbett. I was wondering if you ever get an urge to buy something international or from a different period of Australian art.
No, look, we're, and I'm talking we Lyons and we as a family are great supporters of our city of origin, and we have our roots here, and so this is a great way of supporting a very vigorous contemporary arts culture here in Melbourne. So the boundaries are definitely Australian, and as a collector, once you breach that boundary, it's really hard to know where to stop. So, but we like collecting people in depth and supporting them and having that journey with them, that dialogue with them over a 20-year period. It's a really, a mutually, enriching process.
Corbett and UAG, I have to say thank you so much for allowing us to be here this evening. My understanding is that after this we can move through the house and have a look.
You can, yes, you can. So there's some food and drink, I think, but we just asked that no food or drink really beyond the kitchen area. And in about 15 minutes we'll have the videos working in here, which will be that Matthew Sleeth video of our three projects. So, but yes, you're welcome to walk upstairs, outside, wherever you like.
So on that note, I'd like us to join with me and thank
Very good. Perfect.